Second. All right, and we are live.
Perfect.
Here we are again. It is Siegfried and me, Paul. We're here to do some more actuarial problems with you guys.
Yep.
We started doing some LTAM problems last week. I introduced Siegfried, and there was a lot of people that were very interested in it, so we decided to continue. And we got through, I think, two problems last week. Am I right, Siegfried?
Right.
And
Right.
so today we were going to go ahead and continue this session. And actually, just to prove to you guys,
Oh,
we both have, except for Siegfried told me he's not a coffee drinker, so
I've got water in here.
he's got water. I truly do have some coffee in here. So, um, all right, so without further ado, I'll let you share your screen.
Sure. I guess you need to give me access to be able to do so.
Oh, yeah, you're right, I do. Let me do that right now. Uh, okay, you should be able to share now.
Yep. That's what I can find out. All right. Okay. So actually, I think the last thing that I talked about was the UDD assumption. We really didn't get a chance to talk about the constant force. So I'm just going to spend like maybe 2 to 5 minutes on that, and we can move on because the approach is pretty similar to the UDD approach.
That would be good. Yeah.
So, just so you know, last week we looked at how to use the calculator to fit a linear model when given problems related to problems where we've got some assumptions, UDD assumption or constant force assumption. So we learned about how to use the calculator to perform that process. We also understand that there are some analytical ways that we could do. The calculator, in some fashion, helps to save a ton of time. So, it's the reason why I decided to talk about it. Um, so with a constant force, pretty much, I guess I need to just annotate. Okay. So here is the model for the constant force. So the constant force is nothing but just a geometric model. So we have the L sub x to be equal to a times b to the power x. And pretty much what we need to do here is in order to fit a linear model, we pretty much just need to take natural logarithm of both sides. And once we do that, we should be able to utilize the same process as we did in the UDD case in order to fit the linear model.
Hmm.
The only difference here would be if we to enter the values of the ages and the LXs, which are the x's and the LXs, sorry, in the L1 and L2 columns of the data function, instead of entering the LXs, we're going to be entering the natural logarithm of the LX. So you can see I have that in point number two, and that's because we're taking the natural log of the LX in the geometric model to make it a log linear model. And so once we do that, we pretty much, apply the same algorithm or processes, the calculator steps in order to find the future lifetime and the K-Tate future lifetime. The Maybe I need to point out that in order to find the value of x, since we're taking the natural logarithm of Lx, ultimately we would need to exponentiate the values of LXs in the values of the length of LX in order to obtain LX itself. So let's see if I can just show that quickly. I think I need to. All right. Okay. So here's what I was talking about. So because we did take the natural logarithm of the LX, um, in order to come up with a true value of L sub 50.8, all we need to do is to exponentiate the length of Lx. And since we know that E of Lx is basically just going to give us what? L sub x.
Hmm.
I'm not sure why my screen is goofy today, but
Oh,
okay.
it's all right. I can see it.
All right,
So yeah, it's the goal here is you're working in the natural logs, so to convert back to the number of lives at the end, you have to do e to whatever it was.
pretty much.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, we're not going to spend too much time on that. So move on to the third problem. Um, all right. So the third problem, the requirement here is to write down the Kolmogorov forward equations for these three cases. Um, so maybe a little bit of background about what the Kolmogorov forward equations represent and how useful they can be. The guy who actually invented this model is it's called Andrei Nikolaevich Kolmogorov. I believe he's Russian. Yeah, he worked on this type of model way back in the 20th century. And essentially, what actually struck him to come up with an idea like that was because I mean, you think about the insurance, the whole underwriting insurance process, or even the typical pricing or reserving process. There's so many things flowing into, determining what the final valuation number would be, or from a pricing standpoint, what the price for a particular product would be. I work on the life side, the life annuity side. And oftentimes every month when I'm doing my process, some of the things I do see would be, you know, folks transitioning from deferred statuses to like retired statuses. I also see stuff like, I also see stuff like some of the participants who are already in retired status, will basically call our company and go like, oh, we know we receive some amount of money every month, but we want to take a lump sum. We want to take a lump sum this month and elect a new benefit. So that's some type of what changes or transition that's occurring in the background. So for a prior month, you might say they have a life annuity, but in a current month, because they took a lump sum and elected something different, a different benefit, which maybe let's say they elected like a sudden only policy. Okay, so there have been a change in the benefit form or a benefit form essentially from the prior month to the current month. So those type of changes is what Kolmogorov was thinking about back in those days.
So
He's thinking.
do you actually use the forward equations at work?
So I do not believe that the models that I run has anything to do with it. Um, but just from a very theoretical standpoint, those models can be pretty useful.
Definitely.
So yeah, so the reason why he started, I mean, those challenges obviously exist where you see so many things moving around, which ultimately determines what your final reserves would be. So Kolmogorov was basically thinking about, well, if I can set up a transition matrix and actually, find a technique to be able to model what the expected change in the probabilities would be, that stuff can enable him basically to be able to compute what the expected change in reserves would be month over month or period over period. Um, uh, so one thing I didn't mention though, so he actually before developing this model, he worked a little bit with another guy called Chapman. So they developed a different technique called the Chapman-Kolmogorov equations, and essentially that equation helps you to estimate what the transition probabilities would be. So as he thought about the different pieces that moves around in the underwriting cycle, he started thinking about how do I estimate a change in the probabilities as some of these movements occur. So that's why he came up with an extended version of what he worked with Kolmogorov with Chapman, sorry, on.
That's super interesting having the background too, because I hadn't heard that background about the two of them. And just kind of a reminder for those who are watching, we've got TPX00. Just notation reminder, it's the probability that a life age X after T years transitions from state 0 to 0, or in other words, they stay in state 0. Oh, you got perfect. You've got
Yep.
the
I've
diagram. So
got a transition matrix. Yep.
I'll let you remind everyone about the transition probabilities.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So yeah, as Paul was saying, TPX00 is essentially the probability of a live HX surviving T more years. Transitioning from state 0 to state 0. In essence, remaining in state 0 after time T. And so the second version would be the version with the probably annotate.
Quick shout out to Charles. Thank you. He says he loves our presentation. So
Thanks,
I'm
Charles.
gonna try to pay attention to the chat this time.
Yeah. So the second guy here in red, basically, that's just the probability of transitioning from state 1 to state 0 of a live HX up to time T. And TPX22 is essentially the same thing. The probability of staying in the same state 2 of a live HX within a period of T years. I've got the transition diagram here. So the transition path, essentially, if we take a closer look at it, there is a chance that folks can transition from state 1 to state 0, and also from state 0 to state 1. That's possible. When a live transition from state 0 to state 2, the guy gets stuck. So we can think about state 2 to be like a death state. There is no way folks can resurrect.
We could have a zombie arrow maybe.
Yeah, that might be a zombie. Yeah.
Although, yeah, that's a good idea for this. So this model could be like state 0, alive and healthy. State 1 could be
Perfect. Yep.
maybe disabled or sick or something like that, where you could get back to healthy, and then state 2 would be like death. That would be an example. Really,
Yep.
they could be anything you want them to be, but that's probably a classic life insurance type example.
Right. Okay. So given this transition, we're pretty much ready to come up with the Kolmogorov forward equations. So let's see. Okay. So in order to come up with the expected change in the probabilities, and I know some of the textbooks and the manuals out there do have the analytical formulas that folks can memorize and use on the exam. I do encourage folks to think about some of these models in a very practical way, so you don't get lost in the heat of the moment. I'm going to demonstrate a really cool approach that Yufeng Go, the guy I worked with on the Spring 2020 LTAM exam solutions, I'm going to demonstrate a cool trick that he actually has in his manual. So to come up with that, oh yeah, one more point. So the theoretical basis of the Kolmogorov forward equations says this. So let's say, for instance, we're interested in state 0, folks that are alive, okay? And we want to estimate the probability, the change in the probability as a result of possible transitions that might occur. So the Kolmogorov forward equation is saying that given our state of interest, okay, so given our state of interest, we are kind of looking at the various possibilities where folks in other state transition into the state of interest. So whenever you move from your whenever you move outside of our state of interest into the state of interest, basically that becomes a plus for us because you're coming in. And for folks who are already in our state of interest, moving out, that becomes a minus. So that type of analysis is what is going on within the model. So we just need to keep track of folks that are coming in and folks that are going out, and account for the transition probabilities, and then we should be good. So the way UFN did it, which was really cool. So if I can demonstrate, I'm just going to make a first bubble here to stand for state zero. I have a 1, and then I have a 2 here. So we essentially need TPX00. So I'm going to include one more bubble here. So I have 2 bubbles, then include a bubble here, and include a bubble there. Then draw my transition paths. And once I do this, I'm easily able to visualize who comes in and who goes out with what probability, essentially, and with what transition intensity. So if we look at P00, the folks that are coming in, change the color a little bit, maybe green should do. So the folks that are going to 00 would be from, maybe a black. Yep, would be from 01, right? So that's why we have this P01 over here. And so P01 moves to 00, and with a transition intensity of what? Mu of 10, because mu of 10 is actually this guy right here.
Yeah, so you could consider that like the force of transition.
Force of transition.
Yeah.
Right, pretty much. Okay. So that's the only entry into P00 that we can see. All others are pretty much going out. And so that would take the minus portion. I clear my screen a little bit. Oops.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to undo in here. There probably is, but
Yeah, I should. Yeah, there's a way to undo actually. So the folks that are going out, we see folks in P00 moving to 001. If I change the color a little bit, moving here, and P00 also moving towards 02. Okay, so it's the same P00 that's making 2 different movements. So all we need to do is to account for the force of what transition.
yeah, and just to back up for a second, this is part A. We're talking about the derivative with respect to time of a probability. So what we're really trying to find here is we're saying what's the probability that a person's that is healthy stays healthy for T years. That's what the probability is, but we're saying how is that probability changing over time? So
Correct.
as they're getting older, a derivative is going to take the change in that probability over time, and we're trying to estimate or figure out what that derivative is. And so that's what Siegfried is going through with all these different transitions. And I think this is a very clear way of doing it, because now we're looking at each different possibility and what do we add and what do we subtract to figure that out.
Perfect. Yep, that's a great input there. Okay, so yeah, essentially that's all we need to come up with the expected change in the probability, which is this derivative here that we seek to find an expression for. To solve the B part, it's pretty much the same technique, right? All we need to do, rewrite all your various transitions down. And since we're looking at 1, 0, so I'm gonna add a 1 here, and a 1 there, and a 1 here, and draw my paths. And once I do this, I'm easily able to visualize who is coming in and who is going out.
Mm-hmm.
So who is coming in, essentially, the guy coming in will be P11, as we can tell from here, going to 1, 0, with a force mu of 1, 0. And that's the only thing we see coming in to P10. So then next thing we do is to just focus on the guys who are moving out. And the guys who are moving out from TPX10, essentially they are all moving to either state 2 or state 1 with a
Yep.
force mu 0, 1 and mu 0, 2. Then we are done.
Yep, I like that. And the way you can think of this is that first component that Siegfried circled, the TPX11, it's like you're staying in state 1, staying in state 1, staying in state 1, then boom, you have that force of transition from 1 to 0, which is kind of what our goal was. So we're trying to capture that piece, and then we're subtracting out the piece of, well, if I went to state 1 or to state 2, we don't want that, so we're subtracting that out, and that's how we're calculating this
Awesome.
change in probability. Just a little side commentary.
Exactly so. Nice. So the last guy will just be, should be easy to think about, but let's see how the diagram will look for him. So if I put a 2 in front of the 0 here, if I put a 2 here and I put a 2 there, and we do all our mappings. Actually, because of the fact that when folks transition to state 2, they get stuck and they can never return to any other state, it makes sense to say that the entire derivative is 0. Why? Because the transition from 2, 0 is actually not even possible, right? 2, 1 is not possible. And then once you get to 2, you are dead. There's nothing we can do to revive you.
Yeah,
And
because
so,
as a reminder, 2 to 0 would mean you would go from dead to alive. 2 to 1 would mean you would go from dead to sick
disabled.
or
Yep.
disabled, which you can't do. So yeah, 2 to 2 means you stay dead.
So yeah, the entire derivative there becomes 0. So, all right. So that's pretty much something that I wanted to demonstrate for this.
We
Of
got
course,
a comment from Ernest. He says, "Great insights. Thank you, Ernest."
thanks, Ernest. Okay, so I can wipe all these guys and then we can move on to the next problem. A different flavor of the Kolmogorov. All right. So question number 4. And again, I took this problem from Eufane's manual. Questions go, an insurance company uses the following continuous markup model for pricing a combined 20-year disability and life insurance contract. The policy is issued to a healthy life age X. The transition intensities are all constant for all ages. So this time we have the same diagram as we saw before, but we've got like numerical values assigned to the transition, the force of transition. Okay, so moving from state 0 to 1 is possible. Moving back from disabled to healthy is possible. And then once you get to the dead state, you are stuck. Okay. So you were given the force of interest is 0.05. The death benefit is 10,000 at the moment of death. Payment is made continuously at the rate of 5,000 per year while the insured is disabled. Premium is paid continuously at the rate of P bar per year while the insured is healthy. So the requirement here is to write down the Theology differential equations. Another interesting guy. So the Theology differential equation is just a simple version of the Kolmogorov forward equation. The interesting background here is that the model actually was invented back in the 18th century, but actually never got published until the 20th century.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Interesting.
when I read the guy's background, it was not until his burial nobody actually found out what he was doing with the model.
Wow, that's crazy.
So his best friend actually saw to the publication of this whole Theology differential equation, and some other folks, also extended the model in some fashion. I believe Kolmogorov is one of those guys. Okay, So what is Thiel is saying, similar to how Kolmogorov was thinking, different pieces moving in the valuation cycle or the underwriting cycle, and ultimately determines what our price would be or what our reserves would be, and stuff like that. So Thiele was thinking more in terms of reserves and how the reserves affect the balance sheet. So more so, if we know that there's so many, I mean, if we write a policy and we sell to somebody, we should be able to keep track of every possible eventuality, which that may arise, basically, right? And in doing that, we try to quantify those eventualities and see where the company, where the company gets hurts and where the policyholder actually benefits. But again, the goal is from a capital, requirement standpoint. The goal would be for an insurance company to use some of these, models to be able to make sure that they stay solvent. So Thiele is essentially doing a pretty similar job as Kolmogorov by identifying all these pieces that moves around and products that are being sold out to participants or policyholders, and trying to quantify what the impact would be from an earnings perspective. Because reserves reserves is a liability. We're holding the reserves because we made some promises out to folks, for which we wrote some policies, and promising them that should they die, we're gonna make some amount of money, or if you live up to a particular time, we'll make you some amount of money, or if once you hit retirement, we start paying you like a regular amount of money. So these kind of promises is something that insurance companies try to keep track of.
And this
Um,
is I know this exam is specifically for life insurance, but just a side comment is a super important concept for any insurance company. So it's good to think this way, even though the math is a little different depending on
right.
whether you're in health or property casualty or life or whatever field you might be in. You're gonna have to have reserves in some regard. So, um,
Perfect.
yeah.
Yeah. So a typical balance sheet, you see an amount of reserves that is being booked, and that's a liability to the company because we're holding, this amount of money in case something happens. We're able to use that money to take care of those, eventualities. So Thiele is saying that, well, why don't we come up with something that's able to keep track of all these, moving pieces, in order for us to estimate the change in reserve at any point in time. So from a continuous standpoint, so then that requires some type of partial differential equations and stuff like that. Um, so in order to do that, I think it pays to think like an accountant when you're working with such problems instead of like just memorizing those analytical formulas that we find in textbooks and study manuals instead of like using the memorized formulas. If you can think as an accountant, then it pretty much takes a lot of pressure on you in the heat of the moment. And what do I mean by that? An accountant would basically keep track of his debits and credits, the inflows and the outflows. So, with regards to the Thiele's differential equation, if we can identify what variables are actually inputs or credits and which ones are debits, then we're pretty much easily able to write this equation with no stress. Um, and Go calls it writing it, 100% in a hurry. Um, Okay, so let's see how to do some of these things. I've got some pretty tall notes over here explaining my thought process on how you can do it. Not really found in any textbook, but so
These look good though. It's because
right.
this one, Thiel's differential equation always was a struggle for me to remember. But I think like instead of memorizing everything, if you can think about these different components that you have written down, it really helps to kind of understand the process. So,
Yep,
um,
yep. Yep. So I'm now going to walk folks through stuff that I have written here. I'm just going to demonstrate why the solution is what it is. Applying some of the notes that I have here. So you guys are free to take a look at it and let me know if you have any questions for
Yeah,
sure.
and I have the link to this down in the YouTube. So
Great. All right. So just to annotate again. So again, our goal is to estimate the change in the reserves by identifying, what our profits and losses will look like, and what characteristics or what what different movements actually affects whether we make a profit or we make a loss. So let's focus on what our inputs are with respect to this question. So the first thing to remember when writing down the Theology differential equation is investment interest. Very important. Now the reason why we hold in this reserve is because, like I explained before, is because we want to make sure that we are solvent, and when something happens, we're able to use that cash to take care of that. And so this amount of money that's booked in the balance sheet, the assumption here is that due to time value of money, we have to make sure we invest this money and make some extra bucks on it. So that's where the interest component comes in. So the first thing to think about, and again, I'm solving this for the expected change in the reserve while in state zero. Okay, where state zero there is the held state. So a credit or an inflow would be the interest element there, which is what I'm doing by just multiplying 0.05 by the reserves that we are holding in state zero.
yeah, because we're looking at the change in the reserve, and if you have money sitting in a reserve, that money will make some interest. So that's going to be a piece of your
Yeah,
change. So you
exactly.
have to include that. Yeah.
Yep, good. So another thing to think about with respect to this question, there was a preamble. The preamble made mention of premiums, right? And premiums are only payable when folks are in state zero, which is the healthy state. So you buy the policy, you start paying premiums, continuous premiums for that, and then once something happens, you get indemnified. So the premiums that the insurance company is collecting is also an inflow in a way. So we need to make sure we are accounting for that with a plus, because those are inflows. With respect to this question again, I do not see any other information that actually suggests in the preamble that actually suggests that there might be a credit. But from a reserve standpoint, there is something extra that we ought to do. And I've pretty much broken it out into different pieces so it can make sense. So what is one piece of it? Now let's think about it. What happens when somebody transitions from the healthy state to a disabled state, or somebody transitions from a healthy state to a dead state? What goes on in that process would be that once you move from state zero to state one, the insurance companies would need to release the reserves they were holding in state zero and recalculate a new reserve for folks that actually moved from state zero to state one. So you move away from state zero, we drop the reserves, and then once you get to state one, we recalculate new reserves to be held in that state. So the release of the reserves, which is what I have here, is that 0.04 is just the transition from state zero to state one, if we go back to the transition diagram.
Yeah, that was point zero 0.04 was given just as,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So the reserves we're holding, so the piece of the piece that contributes to the expected change in the reserve while in state zero would be one is that reserve, which is the TV zero. We account for the force of what movement from state zero to state one. which is why we are multiplying 0.04 by the reserve we're holding in state 0. And just remember the plus sign is there because it's a credit, and it's a credit because we are releasing that reserve since the folks are moving away from state 0. So whatever reserves we're holding for them drop, release it, and that becomes a gain for the company's earnings, right? Okay.
Yep. So we've basically taken the interest, which is the company is pulling in interest, the company is pulling in premium,
Yep.
and now the company is pulling out all that reserve. So you're thinking about all that money coming in, but now you're going to talk about the next piece where we have to give some money for the next state. So
Great. So yep, we account for that. If I change the color a little bit, so this piece in red, you can tell there is a minus sign attached to the 0.04, and again, the transition probability was given. So 0.04 times the reserve being held in state 1. The reason why we haven't the minus sign there is because we moved away from, we're interested in the expected change in the reserve, and there's a possibility for folks who are healthy in state 0 to transition to state 1. And as we learned, once you move away from state 0, we release the reserves for those folks. And those same folks that transition to state 1, we recalculate new reserves for them. So because we are recalculating a new reserve, that gets booked into the company's balance sheet, right? Which is the liability. So ideally, we would prefer that, we'll keep releasing more and more, but as we hold reserves, we're holding it because we are liable to make payments to folks.
which is why you
So
said
that,
to think like an accountant, because now we
yeah,
can get all our pluses and our minuses correct.
exactly. All right. So once we do that, we're good. And from algebra standpoint, you can easily factorize 0.04 out, and then you have your reserve in state 0 minus reserve in what in state 1. You know, whichever way you do it, there might be a plus factorized out or a minus factorized out, but ideally, I prefer writing it out this way, piece by piece, just so I know I'm keeping track of every single piece of it. And the SOA loves to throw like extra preambles in problems that if you have only memorized formulas, it becomes very challenging. It may become challenging for you to, incorporate those additional preambles into the
Yes.
Theory's differential equation. Great. So we've dealt with transitioning from state 0 to state 1. We're cool. Now the other one will be transitioning from state what? 0 to 2. So, and again, once we move away from state 0 to state 2, which is a debt state, we release the reserves in state 0 for those folks. And then the preamble said a death benefit of $10,000 would be paid when folks are deceased. And so that's why we have the negative sign, the negative 0.06 times the 10,000, because the company's making some payment out. So that's an outflow. So that must attract a negative sign, basically. So pretty easy, right?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad when you explain it all. No, it's actually not. Thiel's differential equation. It looks weird when you first see it, but once you break out the pieces, you just think about how is my reserve changing for each thing that's going on. It's not too bad when you explain each piece.
Right. Exactly so. So I can wipe the screen, and then we use the same analogy to estimate the expected change in the reserve in state 1, right? Which is this guy. So first thing we'll think about is the investment income. Of course, if we are in state 1, we need to be holding reserves, and interest should be earned on those reserves. So that's what the 0.05 times V, the reserve in state 1, is being accounted for over here. Okay. So the next thing would be Next thing would be, so of course, if you're in state one, you are not expected to pay premiums, so we don't need to account for any premiums there. Another thing we can look into would be um, the movement in the movement when the change in the reserve when somebody transitions from state one to zero or state one to state two, because that transition is possible according to the transition diagram that I showed you guys. So we move away from state one, we release those reserves, and then once we get into state zero, we need to recalculate a new set of reserves for those folks. So the minus piece of it, sorry, the positive piece of it is this guy where we are releasing the reserve because folks are moving from state one to a state zero. And then the negative side of it, which I'll use in black here, would be, we're recalculating the reserves because folks are moving somewhere to to a state, to a state we're really not interested in, um, according to the TLC's differential equation. So another movement would be if you move from state one to state two, which is the dead state. Okay, we drop the reserves. We drop the reserve, account for the force of what transition, and because the preamble said anytime somebody is deceased, we got to make sure we pay the person $10,000. So the minus piece of it would be this guy right here. The last component is a $5,000 benefit, according to the preamble, would be paid when folks are disabled. So that's a regular amount of money you need to pay out when folks are disabled. So
Yep, because
that's an outflow.
we're talking about state one now, so
Yeah, state one now.
yep.
Yep. So that needs to be accounted for as a negative 5,000 in the Theology differential equation. So pretty much that's it. The one thing, maybe I should say this: I haven't seen at the SOA written problems on the annuity part of it. I'm yet to see one. I know, and I'm not. I really don't have access to other manuals, but I know UFAN has like a ton of practice exams and examples for this type of scenarios where, like you have only insurances and how you deal with the Theology differential equation. You have only annuities and how you deal with it. And then if you have a combination of insurances and annuities as well, how you deal with it. But it all boils down to the same concept of
Yep.
thinking like an accountant,
Yep.
basically. Yep.
Yeah, what's coming in and what's going out. That's
Right.
all Thiel's
That's
differential
all.
equation is about.
Yep. Exactly. All right. So folks should let me know if they have any questions. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna.
so this was fantastic today. I think we're gonna call it a day, and
Sure.
Siegfried and I are probably gonna continue doing more problems. So if you guys have interest in any topics, different things you want to hear about, you can definitely comment and let us know.
Yep.
Um, because we love doing this stuff. We're both actuarial nerds, so um, anyway, I appreciate you coming on, Siegfried, and I hope
Hey.
hope you enjoyed your mug of warm water.
Oh yeah.
I enjoyed my coffee over here, and anyway, we will see you all next time
Sure. And thanks for having me, Paul.
for sure. Thanks, Siegfried.
You bet.